Centered at the heart of Europe, Germany has long played a critical role in modern European political economics. As the Cold War superpowers emerged in the aftermath of the Second World War, partitioning of Germany into East and West left a permanent scar on the people as their own culture and autonomy was subordinated to the ideologies of market-driven capitalism and centrally planned communism. In 1989, when the borders between East and West Germany were opened in a series of surprise events, the psychological and cultural walls that separated the German people were slower to go down than the physical barriers. Today, as a reunified Germany nears its 30th anniversary, Cold War politics seem to remain as the United States heavily influences the direction of NATO and the EU, resisting the development of positive relations between Germany and Russia and a general rise of German leadership in the world.
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Military-industrial complex.
A new world order.
But we are here to destroy the control over the industry of other people.
I did not trade arms for hostages.
It's been time stealing.
На полный разгром гнусных захватчиков.
Myth20c podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Myth of the 20th Century. Today we are joined by a very special guest from Germany to talk about the reunification of East and West Germany in 1989. Hello, Philip. Welcome to the show.
And thank you very much for having me.
And of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Hank.
Hey, everyone.
And Nick.
Guten Tag.
And Nick had a bunch of donations on Patreon that he's gonna organize, and so next episode we'd like to do the reading of that. We also have one more announcement about our podcast. We have a hosted RSS feed now on our website, myth20c.com/feed. If you go there with a iTunes or RSS reader, you should be able to listen to our MP3 shows without any other source going forward. And of course, we also still have our videos on YouTube for now and BitChute. So with that, let's get started. So
one more, Adam.
Yeah.
We should also mention that we have a new project, a surprise project that will be coming shortly.
We do. Yes. So let's get that good for everyone when we're ready to announce that officially. But we are working on something. And I also should mention that Identity Dixie was kind enough to syndicate our show recently. So shout out to them. Thank you very much. All right. So with that, let's talk about Deutschland. So Philip, you gave us a very good timeline of Germany's history after the Second World War. And it's a very complicated history, obviously, given that Germany was really at the kind of middle of the Cold War in Europe, especially for a very long time. And there was at a point talking about bringing nuclear missiles into the conversation. And Berlin was very famous for being kind of a sort of international city because of its location within the Eastern Germany section of the partition. And there was obviously a lot of international focus there. The United States President John Kennedy went there, and he made a very famous announcement, Ich ein Berliner, to say that we are all in support of the sort of Berliner cause after the Berlin Wall was built. So there's a lot of very deep history, and then it all sort of changed in 1989. So I guess I want to ask you, where do we start? What is the most important thing to talk about to understand what happened to Germany after the war?
So what happened to Germany, I would suggest you look at what happened to Austria. Austria was part of Nazi Germany until 1945, but it was not partitioned, and it is today not a member of NATO. It is even by treaty not allowed to join NATO. Austria was occupied in the first few years, but the Austrian government as well as the Austrian people soon developed an almost hostile relation to the quote-unquote occupying powers or liberators. They actually were by liberating Europe from the reign of the Nazis, and it got rid of all liberators / occupiers by 1955. While Germany at that point was at a very crucial time, and one could almost already see at that time that it will be somehow partitioned.
Well, in some ways, the partition may have been just taking Austria away from Germany, the German Reich. I don't know any more about the history in Austria, but it's an interesting point you raise about especially the fact that it's not part of NATO. Do you know if that was the decision of the Austrian people, or do you think that was something that was encouraged by external forces?
No, I think it was by the people. By the impetus came clearly from people. We already have a quote unquote bridge or a hole both east and west can meet, and which an entire country that is almost a conference room. It is called Switzerland. It is neutral. We actually don't need a second one. Although I'm glad for the Austrians, they are neutral. But they wanted to be neutral, I think, as much as the Germans. But Konrad Adenauer, who later became chancellor and was pushed to become the chancellor very early. You greatly described this in your previous episode about Konrad Adenauer himself. And he aligned himself and allied himself with the quote-unquote West, meaning the United States and the Western European states, and wanted the Wiederbewaffnung, meaning the rearmament of the German state with the now Bundeswehr, meaning the Federal Army of Germany, and full membership in the NATO pact. I think it was largely to him, and I won't say he was voted because of this, but he was supported by the Western allies because of this.
Well, it's interesting to see who is the quote-unquote elected leaders of the West and Eastern German parts of Germany. In Adenauer's case, obviously he had a lot of history being leader of Cologne or Köln in Western Germany before the Second World War, and he was also a critic of the Nazi Party, which I'm sure helped his selection by the sort of occupying Allied powers in the West. In the East, I'm a little bit less clear on how the Soviets were positioning the individuals, but certainly a lot of them were also anti-Nazi, and they were also typically pro-communist, although not exclusively. A lot of them were from even West Germany, the leaders that were selected for the leading party in East Germany. I could look for some names, but I'm sure Philip has more important people he would probably identify as the main players or the main people in East Germany during the rebuilding process, because the process in the East was probably more difficult than the West, in the sense that the Soviet Union had suffered the greatest losses, military and civilian losses, out of any other country during the war. And there was a lot of hatred and anger towards Germany, especially because of that. And I think the reason the East Germans were suffering was because the sort of reparations that the Soviets were demanding were coming out of the sort of literally the food budgets of the people in the East, to the point where they were rationing up until the 1950s. And obviously their heavy industry was highly prized by the Russians. East Germany was very well known for its optics industry, among other heavy industry, and a lot of that equipment was literally lifted off the ground and put on railroads and moved to the Soviet Union. And the leaders of East Germany, to my knowledge, were then tasked with growing the industrial base after it had just been removed and after it had been destroyed by a war. So it was certainly different than the Marshall Plan in the West, where the United States was building the West up to solidify the Bundeswehr, as you mentioned, and also the economy. So I would be curious to see if you could talk about how the Soviets were managing the East and also the leaders that they were selecting.
You might object here to me. First of all, I'm no fan of socialism or communism, especially after I've researched even more about the East German Republic. But one thing I think should be mentioned, that during the Second World War, almost the entire industrial base of the Soviet Union was destroyed. The Axis powers destroyed not only Russia from now St. Petersburg and then Petrograd to today Volgograd and then Stalingrad, but they also occupied, tried to exploit the oil resources, the hydrocarbon resources of the then Soviet Union in places like Baku, which is now Azerbaijan, and Grozny and Chechnya in Russia. But they also destroyed, on their retreat from the Soviet Union, everything they could find. Every railroad, every bridge, and every factory that was that they still saw and was still remotely usable was destroyed during their retreat. So you had, after the Second World War, you had this peculiar situation of the West, and which was where we should distinguish between Western Europe, that was largely destroyed, and the untouched United States of America and Canada, that were able to help and supply Western Europe and the rest of the Western world with goods and services. The East was almost entirely destroyed. So I don't want to condone the acts of the Soviet Union by taking away the industrial base of East Germany, but for them it was reasonable. For them it was the only thing that was left.
No, I don't disagree. I was just curious about how they did it. I'm not going to say if I think it was right or wrong, but I could certainly understand it. The obviously the sort of focal point was in Berlin, when I think there was, in the 50s, there was an actual like literal standoff between tanks from the Russian and American side, and people can sort of get the exact date for me if they want, but when did the Soviets decide that East Germany was going to actually be an important part of the Cold War against the West, if I'm correct in assessing that? Because obviously the wall and the nuclear weapons question were focused on Germany a lot of the time. You're free to disagree. Yep. I'm asking if you have any opinion on what the strategy was from the Soviet Union side.
for that, I think we should look at how the borders of Germany changed. You may remember that large parts of the west of Poland was part of Germany before the Second World War, as well as the exclave of either Königsberg or Eastern Prussia at that time, which is now 50-50, part of Poland and part of Russia. It's now called Kaliningrad. And from what I read and from what I can understand, not what I condone, but what I can understand, is that then Stalin, the head of the Soviet Union, Stalin, wanted to push the borders of Germany as far away from the Soviet Union as he could, because Russia / the Soviet Union was invaded over and over again by Napoleon, by Hitler, and several other people. You can look it up. It was there were attempts to conquer Tsarist Russia or the Soviet Union over and over again, and I think that he pushed the borders, especially on the Potsdam Conference in 1945 to 46, I guess, as far away from the Soviet Union as possible, to get as much buffer place and buffer states between Germany and everything west and westwards of Germany, away from the Soviet Union. I mean, you can still see this today when they ship over hundreds, if not thousands, of tanks and artillery to the Russian border in this current NATO exercise. I can still see them, even see them here in my hometown. It's massive. It's happening for like right now 1.5 years.
So I certainly agree with the Soviet fear of invasion from places like Germany, especially since the recent war was not long over after 1945 through probably the 1960s or so. But I think at some point the United States started to pose a greater threat than the little West Germany that was left of the former Third Reich. And I'm curious when that transition may have happened, or if you disagree that that transition ever happened. But for example, today it doesn't seem like the Germans and the Russians are very fearful of each other, at least with people even like Angela Merkel or Gerhard Schroeder with the agreement with Putin over the I think it's Nord Stream, the gas pipeline, and the sort of relationship that Merkel and Putin seem to have, which is probably partly due to Merkel's former East German credentials, and I think she does speak Russian, or I know Putin speaks German, so they do have a language connection as well. But there was a change. There's that fear of the Germans after the war, obviously was understandable and reasonable, but I think that changed, and I'm asking, when did that change, if you think it did?
I would say not much changed. First of all, you're right. Our incumbent chancellor speaks Russian, and Vladimir Putin speaks German. And I think not much changed in the desire of Russia to get access to the industrial base of Germany. I don't really know why Germany. I had colleagues in the past in the field of engineering who even visited Russia, and all of them, they unanimously say the German people are greeted in Russia as good as as much as you can believe, more than I can believe, since, well, Germany and Russia have at least troubled past. And this desire of Russia to get access to the industrial base of Germany is at least 200 years old. It happened in the 19th century.
Who was it? Catherine the Great, who was German. There was a Russian czaress who was from a Russian-German family, I think.
Yeah, I think it was her, and she even invited German people because they are supposedly so great, so intelligent, and whatnot. And
that's right. There's a whole German population in Russia from her. I forget the name, but it's that was from her. Yeah.
Until Stalin considered them to be a threat and displaced them to Siberia. So,
okay.
And this drive, this desire, was visible, is still visible if you look back into the 19th century, and you can see it during the time which before the Second World War started, as then Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union traded, and until the Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany was considered to be an ally by the Soviet Union for their deliveries of machines and whatnot. And you can also see it after the Second World War in their desire to get some reparations out of East Germany, the chunk of Germany the Soviet Union pretty much controlled. And this lasts until today. You have a lot of people who, higher up people who still want economic relations between Germany and Russia, because, which is correct, they make up a good duo, because Russia has so much hydrocarbon resources and ore for iron, copper, and whatnot. And it's true. In Germany, we build a lot of stuff. I mean, there's half a dozen car manufacturers here, and I think because of this, they took away large parts of the industrial base of East Germany after the Second World War. This was the part they controlled. This was what they can grab. They couldn't indebt East Germany because there was not much money, or the other way around. You couldn't get much with money at that point, at that period of time. And to this day, you have these attempts of industrialists from Germany who want to deliver their products to Russia, and people from Russia wanting to drive German cars or whatever, have German technology.
So, go ahead.
I don't really know why Germany. Maybe you can answer this for me, but from what I can see, a lot of countries could fit. Italy could fit. France could fit. Great Britain not. Great Britain is clearly too hostile to Russia. But why not France? Why not Italy? I don't really get it.
I think maybe you're being modest, but I think the reputation for Germany around the world is fairly well deserved. I think it's somewhere that people look to as a reliable country in terms of at least manufacturing. That may not be true in reality. I've worked in automotive industries before, and the Japanese are the best, but the Germans do have a reputation, and I think it's partly not that they're necessarily the most reliable cars, but they do have a lot of innovation in terms of certain technology and also good styling. I think it's a combination of things. That's just the cars, but also German people are very time focused, and you can get things done with them. So I think that in terms of business and just especially in manufacturing industries where getting things on time and getting things produced consistently with a trustworthy partner who can repair things if there's problems is very important. Other countries, like France and Italy, for example, are probably a little bit more creative, a little bit more stylish, but they're not going to be as reliable. So I think there's that certain consistency that I think Germany has a well-deserved reputation for, that I think for products like cars are especially important, because obviously if you're in a cold climate like Russia, you're going to trust a car from Germany over, let's say, Italy, who might make really fun cars like Ferraris, but may not drive well in the snow. So I think that's part of it. But since we're focused on East Germany today, and just the discussion of the sort of Russian trade, I was curious about what you think about how the organization between the East Germans and the Soviets was organized. You cited the example of Russia having a lot of raw materials, and in this case, in the Soviet bloc, the East German portion had some of the industrial capabilities, at least in terms of talent, although there was a lot of scientists and engineers that were removed from Germany to be brought back to the Soviet Union and also places like the United States, but that was from the West. But in the East, for example, there was a problem for industry in particular, because prior to the end of the war, there was only 7% of the sort of raw materials needed for steel production sourced from East Germany itself. So, for example, you need coal, you need iron ore, you need chromium, other things if you want to make stainless steel, and the resources are just not in East Germany. They were previously coming from places like Sweden or the Ruhr Valley in the West. But I would imagine that the Soviets were trying to set up a relationship with the resources in Russia to trade with the East, to kind of make that dependency relationship important. Do you know how the sort of supply chains were organized in the East and West? And would you speculate or agree with the fact that there was sort of an intentional symbiotic relationship trying to be set up? You may not know, but I saw that number, and that was very striking to me, because obviously they cannot trade with the West anymore. And so maybe they did, but how did that happen? Like, what was the trading between the different parts of the world after the establishment of the Deutsche Democratic Republic, the DDR?
You're entirely right. The Soviet Union was busy establishing pipelines all across Eastern Europe in a way that they are redundant to each other, meaning they can deliver gas through a more northern corridor to Germany, today Austria, and many other places, or bypass this and delivering gas through the Ukraine or Belarus, and so on and so forth. This works with both oil and gas, and they do so for almost essentially. Like I said, they also Nazi Germany also received at least oil from then the Soviet Union. And yes, I do think this was on purpose to probably get their share of how do you say this, well-fed or well-established satellite states, among them, of course, the East German Republic, and also for further use. They sell their gas today, even to France, and I think Spain receives, although it's a very small share, of their gas supply from Russia. And this makes up, I guess, 90 or 80% of Russia's exports. It's almost only oil, gas, and ore for iron, copper, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and that has been true for a long time. I mean, it's definitely been true in the past 20 years. But I also think during the 1980s, it was one of the reasons why the Soviet Union started having problems, because the price of oil declined over 50%. And do you know if the amount of oil and gas that was, or at least in terms of the proportion of consumption, like for example, like let's say that 90% of the natural gas that is consumed in Germany comes from Russia today. Do you know what percentage of that was in the West and maybe in the East? But I would imagine it was less during the Cold War. Do you know how that trading was happening with the western part of the world from Russia?
No, more. Of course, then the East German Republic was solely dependent on Russia for oil, the Soviet Union for oil and gas. Today, it's I have to think about it. I think it's for Germany as a whole today, 40% of oil and 50% of gas. I'm not sure. Maybe it's 10% more or less. Okay. And during the Cold War, it was definitely more. Germany is almost I would say the European Union is attempting to flee from oil and gas from Russia. You can see this by this weird project they set up to buy fracking gas and maybe fracking oil from the United States.
Oh yeah,
I have no problem with buying gas and oil from the United States or from Russia. Both is better than the people at the Gulf region chopping each other's heads off.
Yeah, it would probably be smart to have both, not just one. I mean, you want to have competition so that people give you a good price.
But the weird case is that even the environmentalist party here in Germany, the Bündnis 90 Die Grünen, which is Born 90 the Greens, which is allegedly an eco-friendly party, voted in favor of and voiced their support for buying fracking gas and fracking oil from the United States. This is the most harmful way to exploit oil and gas, and it is totally absurd to buy it from the United States, ship it all over the Atlantic, and buy it for, let's say, twice the price.
Right.
This is totally bogus. This is also due to the especially this Green Party, this allegedly eco-friendly party.
Well, let me ask you this sort of real supply question. The Energiewende in Germany is the sort of strategy to go away from fossil fuels and coal, especially lignite coal that they mine in West Germany, and the nuclear power now is also part of the plan to go away from. And one of the sort of middle technologies that people are using now to make that transition in places even outside of Germany is natural gas. And so if you are going to generate electricity and heat from natural gas in a higher quantity than you were before, there may be a supply constraint even from Russia. In other words, that pipeline can only produce, let's say, 70% of your demand, and you may have to pay, even though it's more expensive, you still have 30% more that you need to buy, and you still have to get that from somewhere. That could explain part of the reason why the trade is interesting. Now, it's also possible that Russia can supply 100% of what Germany requires, but I also think that's not a politically intelligent strategy because, again, in addition to the economic advantages of having dual suppliers or multiple suppliers, I think you're also going to have a political risk of having a single supplier in case the relations between your countries break down. So I would advocate that it's not crazy to have more than one, but I do understand that the price should not be for all of your gas. Certainly not. I think it's mainly going to be for things that are exceptional or in addition to your basic needs. And I've seen that happen in the United States where there's swings in demand for natural gas, especially because in the parts of the heavily populated country like California, they require natural gas for, they call it peaker production. And so when you're producing electricity using hydroelectric power or wind power or solar power, which are all renewable, you're at the mercy of the weather. And so if you've had low rainfall or if you've had a lot of clouds and you don't have a lot of solar power, you're going to not have as much hydroelectric capacity from the low rain, and you're not going to have obviously as much solar generation. And if there's no wind, then you have no power from that either. So they end up having to buy natural gas on the spot market when they need it. And I would say that's probably what's happening. But you can correct me. I'm just sort of giving my sort of perspective from America.
Yeah, I'm sorry for sounding cocky here, but I have to agree with almost everything you just said. Sorry, this is no offense.
Yeah.
But let's start with the nuclear power plants. I have no reason to believe that Germany is attempting to seize the delivery of electric power from nuclear power plants. There is only such a thing as a memorandum, which roughly translates, as far as I see it, to a pause in which you think about whether you continue it or not. And I expect the government to retract from it in less than a decade. And this would not even be much of a problem. You have Europe is not entirely independent from hydrocarbon imports, but it has more than most people believe. It is reasonable to not put all your eggs into one basket and choose more than one supplier for gas and oil. And I think in there, the European Union could drill in the Aegean Sea of Greece and Cyprus. No one is really doing so. It's just Noble Energy drilling a little bit in the north of Cyprus, where there were some recent troubles, and somewhere in the around the islands of the southern part of Greece. There are allegedly huge amounts of hydrocarbons. I don't know how much, but from what I know, it's quite a lot. This is you was able publicly able to observe the rally for the Aegean gas and oil supplies some years ago. I'm not sure. I think this was 2009, 2010, after the quote-unquote financial crisis. Several companies and Gazprom, the state-owned company of Russia, tried to get the licenses to drill for gas and oil in the Aegean Sea around Cyprus and at the Aegean Sea south of Greece. Unfortunately, Russia was kicked out, and Noble Energy received almost anything for, I'm not sure, 2 billion or so. It's a laughable price. And of course, Noble Energy, United States company. And this brings me back to this quote-unquote eco-friendly party, because they are part, as well as large parts of the European Union, of what is usually considered to be the transatlantic lobby. Pretty much politicians here in the European Union who lobby solely for the United States, to fulfill all their wishes. Like there is just as an example, there is this drone base in Ramstein. Have you heard of this? It's
yes.
in Rhineland-Palatinate.
I think it's the largest military base in Europe from America.
Yeah, and it is actually illegal under German law to have this base from where drones are supplied with the signal. Because of the curvature of the Earth, it's necessary to have a base near the operational site, which is of course the Middle East, the quote-unquote gas station of the world. And it is illegal to have this base here in Germany under German law. But everyone of this transatlantic lobby is keeping silent, says, I don't know, I have seen nothing, I don't know what's happening in there, don't ask me, and let's buy some more fracking gas and more fracking oil from the United States, because the Russians are so evil. Another one of their of the instructions they follow. They're like automatons. You can pretty much tell what they're going to say and do next.
Well, I would love to talk about that more, but I do want to keep focused on East Germany, and I also want to let my co-host talk, since I've been asking all the questions. I have more questions, obviously, but Hank and Nick, do you guys want to talk about maybe the life in East Germany? I think that was most of your questions.
Yes.
Good. Please do.
Do we still have Hank?
I don't know.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay.
But go ahead, Nick.
Well, I was curious. One of my big questions was the lasting cultural effects of the separation of Germany, how people behave and their opinions, etc., in the East versus the West. As one piece of anecdote, I'm a fan of the show Top Gear, and there is a. Hey, hear me out. There is a. Apparently, you can tell me if this is true, Philip, but according to Jeremy Clarkson, there's a big problem on like the Autobahn with truck drivers from Eastern Germany. Like that, you can tell if a truck driver was from the East based on driving in the fast lane slowly, because apparently in the East they did not. This was not really a thing. You just drove. Like the way passing lanes worked was different in the East, and you could, if you see a truck driver driving slowly in the passing lane, then you are almost certain to know that they're from the East. Is that true?
First of all, it is. There's no reason to laugh. All men love and look Top Gear. What he's talking about truck drivers is beyond comprehension for me, because this is the law here in Germany. As a truck driver, you have to drive on the right side. I mean the right side of the right side, right-hand side.
Right.
And allowed to drive, not allowed to drive more than 80 kilometers per hour, which is, I'm not sure, 50 miles per hour.
Yeah,
or so.
yeah.
And this is the law in Germany, was the law in West Germany, and as far as I know, it was the law in East Germany. I don't know where Jeremy Clarkson is driving.
Well, he's British, so you know. Who knows?
Explains a lot. I forgot.
That's right.
But so are there noticeable cultural differences? I mean, if you meet somebody, is it easy to tell if they're from the East without them having told you so?
Yes. I can speak to that. I've been to Germany, and I was in West Germany, and there was an East German with the group, and they spent the entire day making fun of him. I mean, it was really bad. I was like defending him at the end of the day, but he was really nice, and they just kept calling him like OC or something like that, and it was it was clear that there was a certain kind of joke, but I don't know if it's really true. It's just that they do know if you're from East Germany. But please, Philip, how is that today? Like, what do people think about East and West?
Yeah, I have to defend these guys a little bit. First of all, you can clearly hear this by their dialect. We have several dialects here in Germany, and none of the dialects spoken in the former East German Republic is spoken in the West German Republic, and vice versa. So you can clearly hear this. And regarding making fun of each other, this is a widespread phenomenon, and this is totally common, and I would say totally acceptable. We all make fun of each other. Everyone makes fun of the Bavarians. I make fun of how the people from the Frankenland speech. Although the mother of my father comes from the Frankenland, we make fun of everyone makes fun of the other one. This is just normal in here. And but this is just superficial. Of
Yeah,
course,
aside from the accent, what is the actual like cultural difference?
the cultural difference, and I appreciate the former the people from the former East German Republic in that way, is that these people still know how it was to be betrayed, or I think we call it jilted by the government, because they had this pseudo democracy, this pseudo righteous state or justice system, which wasn't really a justice system. And we use, for the German Democratic Republic, the former East German state, we usually use the term Unrechtsstaat, meaning a state that is unjust, or literally meaning unjust state, because of the Stasi and how the elections were a sham and so on and so forth. And this still affects these people, and I admire them for having such a fine sense of seeing and feeling when you're being jilted or betrayed by the government. Right now, you have very different election results in the former East and the former West. Meaning that the parties that are having a lot of voters in the West usually lose in the East, and vice versa.
Yeah.
You have this. We have this far left party. We have half a dozen parties or so in the parliament, but and of course, like in all of Europe, you have the division between the conservatives, the CDU, CSU, and the Social Democrats, meaning the SPD. And we also have parties at their fringe parties, so to say. We have a far left party called Die Linke, meaning the left, which has much more traction in the East. They are right now governing the state of Thüringen. And in the West, they make, let's say, 10% tops. And we have this pretty new party, the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany. And this one also makes around 10% in the West, and is likely to govern the states of Saxony-Anhalt, and I'm not sure, maybe Brandenburg or Thuringia at the next after the next federal elections in 2019.
Well, the election results are very clear if you look at the map, and this seems to be a historical pattern as well. Obviously, the elections in East Germany were probably not really valid from a sort of democratic point of view, but it was demonstrated, I think, clearly during the Depression in the 1930s between the East and West division, and I think the Nazi Party had a lot of support in the East. And then today, the sort of more nationalist parties, again, have that Eastern bias, which is very interesting. And I was also going to mention one more thing. You mentioned the Rammstein air base. A lot of Americans are big fans of the band Rammstein, and they're from East Germany. And they, I remember during an interview, they mentioned that they're probably not looking to go back to communism per se, but what they miss is there was a certain sense of solidarity that the East German culture had. Obviously, there were problems, but they're very skeptical of the sort of materialism of the West to this day. And I think that culture divide is very clear.
I'm not sure if the Nazi Party had more success in the East. I think this was the North-South divide. They had more success, unless if I'm mistaken, in the North than in the South. and also a division between Protestants and Catholic.
Right.
The South is more Catholic, and more North is more Protestant. But regarding the solidarity, yes, I would agree, because just like with remembering how it was to be jilted and betrayed by the government, they also clearly see the difference between the more welfare-orientated socialism of the then East German Republic and the always capitalistic and now even economically radical reunified Germany, meaning they have, I think they have trouble to adapt, which is not really their fault and not really bad. Not really their fault because they didn't live during that time, and the East, the former East of Germany is unfortunately still less developed than the West, although that slowly vanishes. And secondly, not really bad, because I disagree largely with the economic policy of this of the German government, because they use what I call the ideological troika of the Washington Consensus, meaning economic liberalization, privatization, and deregulation.
Right. The question, actually, our co-host Hans, who couldn't join us today, unfortunately, wanted to ask you regarding the East and West reunification process. He was wondering if there was a subsidy program that was discussed about transferring resources, funds, money from the West to the East, that the West was trying to make smaller, make less, and the people in the East were wanting more. And of course, if you want more and you get less, you are a little bit upset or angry. He was wondering if that's true or not, and how did that happen? The discussion between the transfer of money, because I do think that did happen, and it costs quite a bit actually. But the amount that was discussed, I don't know what side wanted, what amount. Do you know about the difference there?
Yes, this is true. This exists, and we have actually two systems. One of them might be very familiar to you. I think you have a very similar system in the United States. This is the first one is the usual transfer payment, common for a currency and economic union. Germany was until it joined the euro currency. And in Germany, you have today a divide between East and West, East and West and North and South, meaning the three southern states that are Baden-Württemberg, Bavaria, and Hesse are much more wealthy and much more productive in an economic sense, meaning they have much superior machines and much superior factories than the rest of Germany. This is also where almost all of the cars come from. Baden-Württemberg produces Audi, Porsche, Krauss-Maffei-Wegmann, the company that is building tanks.
Those are close to Stuttgart.
Yes, this is Stuttgart is the capital of Baden-Württemberg. Baden-Württemberg is the southwestern state, at the border of France and Switzerland. And Bavaria, of course, famous for BMW. And they kind of pay a subsidy to the other states. And you have also a transfer of wealth, of money from the west to the east, which is called the Solidaritätszuschlag, meaning solidarity payment. It was introduced after the reunification to lift up the former East to the level of the West, because it was it left less developed after the East German states ceased to exist. So you have a lot of transfer payments from the West to the East to rebuild them. This is of course very important. You can see this was because East Germany wanted and kind of deserved the then Deutschmark, the unified currency, although you can today discuss this, whether or not they should have joined the Deutschmark or should have should still have their own currency to inflate and to have their own exchange rate. You can see this problem still in the greater proportions in the Eurozone, where you have the surplus countries. Germany is the surplus country, and all the deficit countries, meaning that Italy, which is now, as far as I can see it, again discussing to leave the euro or introduce a parallel currency or something like that, which is just important. At some point, the euro will collapse. I guarantee you that, because we have this trade imbalance of right now 250 billion euros of goods coming out of Germany, for which Germany receives only paper or higher numbers in the bank accounts, but no goods, no commodities.
Well, do you think that's intentional on some level, because the export prowess of Germany is something that a lot of business people, or at least politicians, are probably proud of, from what I can tell. And a lot of the periphery countries, as we call it in the West, around Germany, are, as you say, the deficit spenders, and they have to pay for that with debt, essentially, and paper, as you're saying also. But the priority seems to be that Germany wants to maintain that surplus. And whenever I talk to at least some Germans, they seem to be proud of that. Most Germans are not ashamed of that. They may complain that they're not getting money, valuable money in terms of what they can buy from the trading partners, but it seems like Germany likes it that way in some ways. And I don't think it's sustainable. I agree with you. And obviously you cannot continue to borrow forever without paying for it eventually. But the sort of bias or the objective seems to be in Germany to maintain that surplus, which I would say is reasonable. It's better to have a surplus than a deficit, but in the long run, you want to have a balance, I would argue. But what do you think about the priority in Germany for maintaining a surplus?
You can count me, and I'm the one who is unhappy, and I haven't really caused it. I haven't I don't work for 250 billions a year, but I'm kind of ashamed that that people are actually happy about that. I mean, okay, if they don't understand what's happening,
right.
they are so to say excused, or I don't want to slander them for not knowing what's really happening. But as a matter of fact, it is terrible. This is like we work. All of Germany is working for
for nothing. It's stupid.
And not only a day or some hours. No, 250 billions, and the entire gross domestic product of Germany is like 3 trillion.
Right. But what's funny is that America has an even bigger number in the negative direction, although our economy is larger. But it's that bothers me, and the problem I have with Americans is they don't care. They're not thinking about it. They're looking at Dancing with the Stars or some bullshit on TV, or Kim Kardashian. So it's like, this is why I sort of like Germany. It's like, oh, like this is a country that sort of wants to work, wants to produce, which is a good thing. I mean, if you obviously suddenly like lose all of your trading partners, you could actually survive, versus some of the countries that depend on your products. They would have a harder time in some ways, at least for a while, until they become more self-sufficient, which I would like also. But it's just funny hearing the sort of differences, because the American government especially, I think, is mainly responsible for our trade deficit, because the government keeps printing money, paying for all this military and all this stuff. And it gives people money to spend because they didn't have to earn it from exports. And that's the reason we basically have a trade deficit. I mean, it is sustained by the U.S. dollar being printed by the U.S. government. And so I think we're basically a bunch of drug addicts here in that way, economically. But maybe we should talk more about East Germany again. I do enjoy getting the chance to talk about Germany, though, as a whole with someone from Germany. So thanks to the audience for indulging me and everyone else, hopefully, if you like this economic stuff. But Hank, you had a question about the famous or infamous Stasi. Would you like to talk about that if you're still there?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit kind of in the run-up to the show before we were recording, but it seems like after East and West Germany reunified, I mean, the place was basically run as a security state, a police state. Like, huge portions of the population were famously acting as informants at one point in their life or another. They had a huge Stasi. They're a sort of version of the FBI. Or maybe vice versa, depending on how you look at it, of about 100,000 people by the end. They had a very large, proportional to the size of their population, military. And after they reunified, my understanding is that all of those pensions basically got wiped out. Veterans in their various branches of their armed forces weren't credited, even with the same status that, for instance, SS veterans had in the West German pension scheme. And nevertheless, like, there might have been some resentment. I would assume that there was, but there really wasn't any kind of conflict. And it doesn't seem like there were a huge number of repercussions for people who, for instance, were very involved in the Stasi, actual Stasi sort of executives. But I'm wondering if you can speak to kind of after unification, how various factions within the kind of security establishment were dealt with, and how they sort of thought of themselves as relating to the new arrangement.
Allow me to start by saying that Stasi, which its originally name is Ministerium für Staatssicherheit, meaning Ministry for State Security, was extremely terrible. It not only spied on people, but it had a program called Zersetzung, literally meaning dissolution, and it's not referring to a theoretical object. This Zersetzung, this dissolution, was targeted with this Zersetzung, dissolution. People were targeted. People were supposed to be, dissoluted.
Liquidated, I think, is a better translation.
Not killed, but psychologically abolished.
We call that demoralization.
Definitely more.
I believe this was the program where they would, for instance, literally break into somebody's house and like subtly rearrange their furniture.
Yes.
Like things of that nature. Like I mean, that sounds very petty, but when that's kind of the final straw of a long string of harassment.
Well, it's psychological
sort of
torture. I mean, that
Right.
tells you that you are powerless, and they have every access to your inner life. That it is truly terrifying.
Almost all institutions of the East German state were controlled, but at least infiltrated by the government, usually by Stasi members. The only one that left, for whatever reason, surprisingly unscathed was the church. I don't really know why, but it seemed...
I was surprised by that
largely
too. I was reading about how they actually allowed the churches to exist, first of all, but second of all, there was a campaign by the church to talk about, like, it's from the Bible, the story of the swords to plowshares. It's basically taking, your weapons of war and turning them into tools of food and prosperity. And that was an idea that they were talking about, and the government actually shut it down. So that was one example where they did actually try to control the church. But the fact that the church was even there in a communist country, which is usually explicitly atheist, is very surprising to me as well.
Yeah, they allowed them to practice the faith. They didn't go so far as to demolish churches, those who were still standing up.
Although, you know what, this just occurred to me, but and this happens in the West, United States at least, as well. The church is an institution, and when you have an institution, you have people who can be monitored. And I'm wondering if there was a strategy to use the church as a way to spy on people, as we're talking about with the Stasi, and to co-opt people, also to maneuver their influence over the population in a way that is conducive to the goals and agendas of the government. And this has happened with the CIA and the Catholic Church, for example. And I don't know if the strategy was maybe being tried in Germany, in East Germany, for that reason, but it's possible, I think.
Well, there is peculiar. There's one very famous example, also wrongly portrayed by the media. The curious case of Joachim Gauck, former federal president, the last one before now Steinmeier, and he was a citizen of the East German Republic, the East German state, and he was called by some people as the Red Pastor. I guess you can figure out how this was supposed to be understood. And maybe he was used. I have no hard evidence on this, but he's a very spineless character, so I think this is possible. But the church was largely left unscathed after they expropriated all the land the church owned, after the East German Republic was set up, and the meaning of the church was largely diminished. And at that level, it stayed and survived, which I guess kind of backfired because they didn't had much interest in the church after that. Meaning the government, of course. But the church organized interest against the government. The peace demonstrations started in a way in the church by people from the church, meaning that the first rallies and demonstrations started in churches in the East German Republic. I guess they left it. They didn't completely destroy it, but they left it alone because they had no use for it anymore. Like you said, the not really communist, but communist/socialist government was not interested in this in the church and was pretty atheist, and thus had no use for it, and seemed not to misuse it in a way, except probably for for Joachim Gauck, the Red Pastor. But that ultimately backfired.
I was curious about the, I think it's called the Frauenkirche in Dresden, the great cathedral that was destroyed during the war. Was that left unrestored for the entire East German period? Because it was restored eventually. I think that was after, though.
Yes, this is true. It's a Frauenkirche, literally meaning woman's church. It's a very large church in Dresden, the capital of the state of Saxony. The state of Saxony is at the Czech-German border. And yes, it was left unrestored and not rebuilt until 1990, the 1990s. Then it was then the rebuilding process started, and took about 10 years or so.
Yeah. It's a beautiful church. It's very interesting, unique architecture.
All of Dresden is very famous for being very beautiful. It is one of the most beautiful states of Europe. It should be named along with, I guess, Paris and.
Yep. Well, there are a lot of estates from, I guess, the German nobility that are somewhat comparable to Versailles. I mean, I would not sort of go that far, perhaps, but I would say the architecture was as impressive in terms of the effort that they put into it. The interior design was beautiful. There's these huge, elaborate murals on the ceilings. I mean, they really did a lot of work in that part of Germany.
Yeah, it's I think it's because most of the buildings, like the Semperoper, Frauenkirche, and several other buildings in Dresden, were built after this style of architecture became famous, and at a time where you had very advanced, more advanced ways of building buildings. So this is also because they are so big, and you have these very big stones and tiles being used for these buildings. And you have, I guess this is where the Versailles comparison comes from. There is a building called Orangerie, meaning a garden especially for fruits that are naturally or usually just growing in the south, like oranges. And it's a large garden surrounded by walls, so to say, and with several gates. And it appears like a smaller version of Versailles.
You know, one of the questions I always had since I was young about these great monuments to human creativity and culture and architecture, especially in communist states, was that sometimes the communists would allow them to exist, and other times they would destroy them. I mean, there was very famous churches being destroyed by the communists in Russia. But what I was wondering was how does the communist government explain to its people that this clearly beautiful piece of work is not acceptable in the communist system? It always seemed kind of absurd to me. Like, why can't you guys, make something that beautiful? Like, what's wrong with it? It's like, obviously, if it's just one person using it, but it just seems kind of silly. Yeah.
Check your lying eyes, comrade.
Yeah, it must be my eyes.
Yeah, the aesthetic standards were subordinated to communist theory. So
I know, but it's like so obviously stupid. I mean, it's this is not talking about like the economy. We're talking about like the sort of part of the brain that is like millions of years old, honestly, that just recognizes things that are
that's
aesthetic.
The standard Václav Havel point that the fact that the lie is not credible is what makes it an effective tool of domination.
Bingo.
That you're forced to participate in the lie by not even being able to point it out.
That's true if you have 100% cynical operators at the top, but I don't think everybody in this sort of, especially in like places like East Germany, were that cynical, because people like Honecker, from what I can tell, was actually, perhaps he was naive, but he seemed to believe in this sort of communist system. I was in Berlin once, and there was a street vendor selling a book, and it was in German, but my friend translated it for me, and it was sort of like Honecker, like he was a politician, first of all, but he had a blue-collar background to his credit, but he had like a suit on and a hard hat, and the title was Erich Honecker, a man of the people, and my friend just thought that was the stupidest thing he'd ever seen, but he, to me, looked like he actually believed this stuff. So maybe Philip can comment on sort of the cynicism versus the believers in the communist system in East Germany.
I would answer this question as well as the last one regarding the beauty of buildings with a comparison. It's the animal farm. Everyone is supposed to be equal. Of course, not all are equal. Like the higher ups, for example, Erich Honecker. But they want to appear this way, like the People's Parliament, the Volkskammer of the East German Republic, was a very bland building. It was like a huge cubus. Extremely boring if you look at it. It doesn't stand anymore, but it was demolished. But it was very boring to look at. In harsh contrast to the current parliament, the Reichstagsgebäude, which is very impressive. But it also shows that the government is something special, something worth building such a beautiful and such a big building. Unlike the very boring and smaller People's Parliament, the Volkskammer. And I too believe that Erich Honecker believed in socialism. He was also, like his predecessor, Walter Ulbricht, trained in Moscow in how to perfectly run a socialist state. And I think he actually believed in this, but look at his credentials, look at what happened. And you can clearly see so much, you can find so much evidence of corruption, of mismanagement. There is this story of skirts being made in the East German Republic at autumn or so, and they ran out of resources, meaning clothes. So they had the choice were confronted with the choice of making a lot of short skirts, totally, which is the wrong decision for autumn, or very significantly fewer skirts that are longer. But they decided to make a lot of skirts to provide everyone with a skirt. And this, of course, backfired like so much.
Why? What's wrong with the short skirt?
It was
that was
awesome.
Kind of a joke, but yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, obviously it's cold in Germany. Well, I read about the example of the electronics industry. The Erich Honecker again. He just seemed to be out of his league. He was kind of unqualified to be running the economy, at least. And he thought that, after Germany was starting to have East Germany was having financial problems in paying debt, and they were borrowing from the West at one point. which is interesting. He thought, and it reminded me of Ceausescu from Romania. He thought that they could save, the economy by becoming the Japan of the Eastern, like Warsaw Pact, Eastern Bloc, and it was a complete waste of money. They didn't make any progress, from what I can tell, and it just got the country into further debt. Maybe we could talk about the financial situation in the 80s at least. And maybe if it was doing better also in previous periods, because the communist economy, from what I know from the Soviets and also some of the other countries that were starting to implement communist systems from usually like a less developed state, was that in the early stages of implementing at least heavy industry, you could show statistically, at least, like sort of China is showing with all of its housing development, you could show increases in the gross domestic product as we calculate it in the West. And they would calculate it in sort of a similar way, a somewhat different way. It was usually like how much was produced rather than the price times the quantity, because price was less relevant in the communist economic systems. But the production numbers were usually what was targeted, and in the Soviet Union, the production was, and I've looked at these in old sort of statistical manuals of the Soviet Union, like the numbers were always going up. But obviously the quality problems, as we sort of talked about with the skirts, was an issue. But you also reach a point where the sort of quantity also is like irrelevant, or much less relevant as you've reached a higher level, and you really start wondering, okay, like, do we need to produce this? Should we be producing food? Should we be producing consumer goods? And I do believe there was a shift to consumer goods after the initial war was over, period of rebuilding. But Philip, could you talk about how the economy was doing maybe before the 1980s and then maybe during the 80s at the end of the East German period?
That's debatable. Some say that East German Republic reached stability in the 70s, but I don't believe so. They might reached the maximum of what you can get from a planned economy. A planned economy is not it's not a no-go per se. It's not it doesn't kick you out of the orbit in an economic sense. China wouldn't be there where it is today if it wouldn't be for the planned economy, because this way you can quote unquote easily, quote unquote fast build infrastructure like housing, streets, and railroads, but it is ineffective in providing innovation. And I guess this is what the East German Republic achieved in the 70s. They reached or get everything you can get out of a planned economy at that point, and because they provided so much housing, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. But then they needed further innovation, further increase in labor productivity. This is also the sad story of what you said with the electronics sector. They tried to supply the world with microchips, with advanced microchips at that time. They couldn't really produce. They didn't really have the means to and the machines to produce them. So they sold them at a loss, which was crucial. The government thought that at one point they will endure enough of the loss, and at one point it will they can make a profit from it. I believe they only had to produce it at a loss for a short amount of time, that it would end at one day. It didn't, because they seemingly were not innovative enough and did not have the money to buy the products from the West. This is the loan they receive from West Germany, from the West German Republic. It was arranged by a guy called Franz Josef Strauss. He was the head of the Bavarian state and the quote-unquote right-wing CSU, and which is considered to be the right-wing part of the conservative party here in Germany. Which is curious because Franz Josef Strauss coined the term lieber ein kalter Krieger als ein warmer Bruder, meaning rather a cold warrior than a warm brother. He was a homophobe. And he went over and negotiated this 1 billion Deutschmark credit for the East German public as a extended means of the quote-unquote Ostpolitik, meaning East politic, introduced by Willy Brandt, Chancellor Willy Brandt in the 16th to 70s. He was Chancellor from, I'm not sure, 66 or so until 72 or so. I'm not entirely sure, somewhere along that. He wasn't Chancellor anymore while this credit was negotiated. And he wanted to approach the East, at least East German Republic, the East German Republic, in a softer sense. He wanted to show the East German citizens how good they could have it, meaning the living standards. They shipped a lot of commodities, not only to the East German public with that credit, but also through East Germany to West Berlin. So everyone can see this, see the cars and everything else they were shipping to West Berlin.
What was the sense in East German people's mind? And that obviously depends on who the person is, but maybe you can, Philip, you can describe the sort of general opinion about West Germany and East Germany, and also maybe some of the extremes. I'm sure there were some people who were very pro the communist system, maybe not a lot, but some I'm sure, and also people who were very against it, and then probably the middle, just wanted a normal life. But maybe you can talk about the differences in the political spectrum or the opinions of people about their own country and also the West.
Today or then?
Well, maybe both, but let's start with then, if you have any knowledge about that.
Well, East Germany, the East German public was kind of trapped. It was more or less a prison. You couldn't really leave it, and you couldn't really...
Especially later, because in the beginning people could move.
Yeah, until the wall was built.
Now, were most people going through Berlin? Because Berlin is in the middle of East Germany, but the reason they would use that is because the city itself was partitioned, so they can go to the western side and then get on an airplane. But I also wondered about the frontier with the entire West Germany, because if you maybe traveling was difficult, but it seems like that would be an easier way to get across because there's just more distance for soldiers to have to monitor rather than going to Berlin, which is much easier to look at and surveil. So I never understood why that was not more popular of a route than Berlin, but maybe you can explain.
Sorry, which route?
Just so you have East and West, and there's a big border in between them, which was, I don't know, maybe 800 kilometers. I'm not sure how long it was, but that's a very long place to look for an opening versus Berlin, which has all the military focused on it. It seems like it would be easier to go across the big border versus the small border.
Actually, not. Both borders were fortified at one point.
Yes.
The West Berlin, yeah, as you correctly said, was right inside the East German Republic, surrounded by the East German Republic, and this is where the famous Berlin Wall was built, and they had. They kind of erected something like an inverse fortress, meaning that
yes, the guns were pointed inside, not outside.
Yes, and the citizens of the East German Republic were not allowed to flee to West Berlin or West Germany.
Well, what was the propaganda, or at least the government explanation for that? It's like you're a traitor, you're going to give all the secrets away, or you owe the country your work. What was the sort of government explanation?
West Germany was, and all of Western Europe was the class enemy, the Klassenfeind.
Fascists, right? They called the Berlin Wall the anti-fascist wall. So,
yeah, correctly. Yeah, and that's this, and the same government who installed and runs the Stasi. Sure. And this was the official explanation. This was the class enemy, the Klassenfeind, and if you fled, you might. How should I say this? I would compare this like if you right now travel from the United States to Cuba. Both countries have a very complicated, pretty hostile relationship. And fleeing from the East German Republic to the West in general was a crime after, I have to check this, 1961 or so. Then it was the law Republikflucht, meaning fleeing the Republic, was introduced. And then it was officially a crime to, it's 1968. And then it was an official crime to flee. And regarding the borders, you have to think that remind yourself that the border between East and West Germany was also fortified with barbed wire, with fences, 5 kilometer, which is 3 miles. Exclusion zones. They even forcefully removed all the people who lived there, and installed mines.
Wow.
As well as spring guns. Meaning,
so maybe it was that exclusion zone that makes the difference, because in Berlin you don't have 5 kilometers to make an exclusion zone. So yeah.
Yeah, and you have neither. There were never mines or spring guns at the Berlin.
Spring guns. So these are actually like motion activated, like guns that would pop out or something. That's horrible. Jesus.
There was this guy called Michael Gartenschläger, who was a former East German citizen, and knew how terrible it was, and fled to West Germany. No, sorry, he was bought free, so to say. The West German state had the habit to buy free political prisoners from East Germany. Weird, I know, but this guy called Michael Gartenschläger was also bought free, and he continued to his attempt to tell the world how terrible it was, and he wanted to remove one of those spring guns from the German border at 1976, and the Stasi was aware of him, and his head, Erich Mielke, ordered the Volkspolizei, the People's Police, which was the border patrol,
Mm-hmm.
to shoot him. So he was shot at April 30, 1976, while removing one of those spring guns to show it to the public.
He was going to show this to the Eastern German people or the West?
To the entire world.
The world, okay. Well, that actually brings up another point. The East Germans were able to receive television signals, I'm sure radio also, from the West.
Mm.
And I'm assuming that was illegal to watch those transmissions, but people could figure that out anyway. And I think there's a similar situation in North Korea as well. And that also brings up the question of what do you think the similarities and differences are with North and South Korea to East and West Germany?
I've never been to North Korea, but yeah, in that way they are probably similar. And you have the same situation with people fleeing from North Korea to South Korea, as you had this with East and West Germany.
I should mention the number of people that left East Germany, I believe, is 3 million. Now, I don't know if that number is correct. That seems very high, but I think that happened in the beginning at least, but please correct me. I just wanted to make the point, though, that people who sort of fantasize about the wonders of communism compared to the disaster of the sort of Western, quote-unquote, Washington democracy is, I think they're overlooking just how bad communism was. I'm not defending the Washington consensus by any means, but the volume of people, I think, demonstrates the choice that people were making. But yeah, please go ahead about the number if you have a more accurate estimate.
No, 3 million is seems pretty correct. Maybe it's 2.5, maybe it's 3.5. I don't really know, but
sure, that's a lot of people. And in East Germany, the population was what, 20 million? I mean, at most, like I don't know. So that's a lot of people.
The official statistics say they were 80 million in the beginning, and they 80.4 million, and shrank to almost only 70 million. To
wait a minute. But the total population of Germany is about 80 million now. Do you mean 18 or?
Sorry, 18.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, 18.5 to 17 million in 1961. This is when the wall was built and the German border was beginning to be fortified, and they were slowly shrinking. They used the term bleeding out because it were the more qualified people, like the father of my father, who first fled from Silesia before the Soviets came, ended up in Berlin, studied engineering as a East German citizen, and then left before 1961, before the wall was built. And here's a perfect example, because he was one of those citizens that made the East German public slowly bleed out of higher up qualified people. And this is, of course, a huge problem, because you pay a lot of money until someone is an engineer, and then he's just away. This is pretty bad. This way, the East German public paid for a lot of engineers and probably doctors and so on and so forth for West Germany. And this was one of the reasons, because they built that wall. And he's also an example for what you explained, or what you asked earlier, is what do the people thought about the difference between East and West Germany. He hated the East German public for his entire lifetime. Unfortunately, he died before East Germany ceased to exist, but he always hated it and never wanted to visit it again. Although my family has relatives over there, he had a really hard time, and his wife, who is from West Germany, could very well understand why he hated the East German state, because of the government, of course, not the people. And he is she is his wife is a perfect example, because for her it was a way down, so to say, in regarding the living standards, visiting the former East German Republic, and she could see it. She could see the less expensive cars, the lack of food.
Was it the Trabi, the famous?
Yes.
Yeah. That I don't know if you know the power like rating, or we call it horsepower in America. I'm not sure how you measure it in Europe, but yeah, it was probably not very much. Right? Yeah, really, really bad, and it took forever to get. Right, it was like 20 years if you were lucky.
Yeah, you had to sign in and wait until you get it.
Right.
Also, the engine was this weird. It only had 2 steps. How do you call it?
Cylinder or stroke? Like 2-stroke versus 4-stroke?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thank you. 2-stroke engine. The Trabi was a 2-stroke engine.
Yeah, and they're super noisy. So if anybody doesn't know what the 4 versus 2-stroke, just listen to your in America, your wonderful Mexican gardeners, weed whacker or leaf blower. That's a 2-stroke engine. They're really loud. Anyway, just to give an example, but what was the shortages like? Because communism is sort of famous because they don't have the pricing mechanism, supposedly they were always inexact in their production quotas, and shortages were very common in at least Russia. How do you know about East Germany, if there was any shortages of important things, and did people find that irritating?
Pretty much the same process and pretty much the same problems. Just allow me to continue to answer your last question.
Oh, please.
Both of these people, the parents of my father, lived at least for a time in East, respectively West Germany, and both could see the difference in living standards between East and West Germany and the propaganda. You were able to receive Western television, so to say, West German television, and the neighboring states. I'm not sure. A part of Saxony, a part of Thuringia, and part of the other states, but not everywhere. And you had trouble getting access to, for example, books or newspapers from the West. Every time you wanted to visit the East German Republic, there were these people's police, the Volkspolizei, looking at all your stuff while traveling from west into east. My grandmother visited relatives several times, and just ordinary stuff like clothes were searched for every minor detail. She said this was crazy. She's a normal being. You would consider her boring, and they were looking after her stuff for sometimes hours. This was because
this is obviously sad, but it's also kind of a little bit amusing to people who are not German, who kind of hear this, and at least from my point of view, it confirms some of the sort of cultural traits of German people, regardless of East or West, that they are very thorough. Regardless of how silly it may be, they want to do the job completely. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why the Stasi were so oppressive is that they took the ideas of the sort of surveillance state and they took it to this extreme that we would probably call obsessive compulsive almost. But that was not intended as an insult or anything. It's just it's a certain behavior that is very very stereotypical of Germans. So
we here on the right are very okay with national stereotypes and moderation, and there are plenty about American that we love to engage in as well.
That's totally okay. And I think you have a point in there because, I think the same. We Germans, we always want to be the best. We wanted to be the best at National Socialism. We wanted to be, at least the people in East Germany wanted to be the best at socialism, meaning or communism in the East German Republic. And now we want to be the best at exporting stuff. This is the plight of the German people who always want to be the best.
Never happy. You're always wanting more to do better.
And we will hope to get to the case of the curious case of Annetta Kahana, former Stasi member, and she also wants to be the best at spying on people. But again, you were talking about the economic growing pains of introducing socialism or communism in the East German Republic. Well, you had pretty much the same dynamic as in the Soviet Union, where they were starting to expropriating land without compensation in the East German Republic. They were expropriating large landowners, the land the church owned, and of course factories. As the Communist Manifesto says, seizing the means of productions, right? And what happens if you do this? You give either land or machines. You take land or machines from people who know how to use the machines and grow crops on the land to people who know not necessarily know what to do with it. If you give me land right now to grow crops, I would starve and I will be a disappointment because I have no idea how to do this.
Right.
But this is what the East German Republic did. They took the land and distributed it to Kleinbauern, meaning small farmers. And surprise, surprise, it was in the 50s or 60s, after, I guess it was a harsh winter or so, they endured food shortages.
And you know what? It was actually China that was sending food to East Germany, in spite of the fact that they were starving also. But it was to get probably the industrial equipment from Germany again to industrialize China. But I think the fact that they're importing it from China, which is a far distance, obviously, is indicative of the fact that they were needing food.
Wow, didn't know that. Maybe I have to thank the Chinese people for that.
Maybe because I wouldn't really thank them. It was more Mao's decision, but it was it resulted in millions of them dying. I mean, it was horrible, and it's not Germany's fault. It was Mao's megalomaniacal power lust that drove him to that. But it was, and also just psychopathy. Like, he just didn't care about his people, which is disgusting. But yeah, I did read when we did a show about the rise of Mao, and that was something I didn't mention. But it was a lot of it was going to the Soviet bloc, so that they could pay for all the sort of equipment they were buying.
This was the period where Mao wanted to get rid of the older people who still know how it was under during the Republic of China, as the communists didn't before the communists rose to power. Okay, thank you. And I think this is a perfect example of the entire economic history of East Germany, just like with the microchips. they wanted to supply these, but didn't really knew how or with which machines. Although, funnily, there is a plant in Dresden from Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, right now.
Right,
So
and there is, I forget the name of the company. I think it's Infineon. I'm not sure, but there's a German microchip company today that that may have had to, partner with AMD because AMD is struggling against Intel. But I don't know if you know the name.
The Eastern Bloc did all sorts of crazy economic sort of investments into new technologies, and they were not doing poorly in a lot of areas like metallurgy, optics, precision machining. But the whole microchip thing, I guess, sort of wasn't something that they had anticipated being an area that they needed to invest in. And if anything, kind of would reward, gigantic amounts of fixed physical capital and central planning. Like, you talk about building a microchip fabrication plant now, and it's a multi-billion-dollar investment that you plan like 20 years in advance. But I mean, it seems like they didn't sort of have that realization far enough ahead of time. They didn't have like the small fabs that were actually working on kind of smoke testing some of the technology. And by the time they tried to play catch up, it was already kind of an economically essential technology by the mid 80s. And there was just kind of no place for them to go really after that.
One of my German friends used to point out to me that even though the sort of East and West difference in annual personal income was clear, the West being richer, the East being poorer, he would point out to me, again with the sort of pride of a German, that the East Germans were the most productive communist in the world. I don't know if that's true, Philip, but I believe it to be true. It makes some sense. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I think the per capita GDP of the East German Republic was the highest among the vassal states of the then Soviet Union. But yes, it is also true that the West was, at least after the 60s, 70s, significantly richer or wealthier than the East, since, I guess then the process of course, the Marshall Plan and the process of increased labor productivity and technological innovations came into effect and caused the West German Republic to surpass the East German Republic in living standards.
We're talking almost all about East Germany. What was the Western perspective during the Cold War about the East? Did they view them as sort of like a little bit today, they view them as a little bit behind, or did they feel sympathy for them? I mean, I'm sure they did a little bit, but was there also this pride, or I'm sure there were also people who wanted to keep them away also, because if you look at North and South Korea today, there's many, I know South Koreans that do not want to connect with the North, which is interesting. But I mean, I can sort of understand that because they would obviously be burdened with taking this sort of very different society and trying to transform it, and obviously the North wants to do that to the South, and so there's just this kind of disagreement between the two that may never be resolved, especially if you look at how East Asian in particular cultures operate. They're very very prideful, and they don't like to admit mistakes, and it would be very different, I think, in the reconciliation. But going back to Germany again, what do you think the Western view of the Eastern people was?
Mind if I end the last question with a joke? A man from Dresden, a city in the East German Republic, a man from Dresden took his courage in his hands and went to the police station. Said, "I want to leave the country," he says. The police officer asked him, "Where do you want to go to, young man?" And he said, "To the GDR, to the East German Republic," he answered. "But you are already here," exclaimed the astonished officer. "No, no," comes the riposte. "At long last, I want to move to the GDR, which is described in the newspapers."
Right, and that's probably a West German joke, though.
No, this is the East German.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, reflecting East German citizens who were aware of the propaganda at that time.
Right.
And,
was that allowed to actually be told? Because in places like Russia, those types of jokes were sometimes taboo or criminal, even.
It depends who was supervising you. A quick spoiler on Annetta Kahane, former unofficial collaborator of the Star.
Yeah, you sent me the picture of her. She's got this like.
Oh, you looked at the picture? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. She's got this like pumpkin face with pumpkin hair color, and it's something you would not show to small children. I don't really know much about her though, so maybe you can sort of explain the background with the sort of image.
She looks like the clown from the Stephen King movie. Who was it?
Tim Curry.
Yeah,
Pennywise.
Tim Curry. Yeah.
Pennywise. Thank you. She slandered the actors Klaus and Peter Barsche and said they were enemies of the state. And this is when the mobbing process, so to say, of the government kicked in and made it hard for them to get a role in a movie or in a theater, and made their life worse, in which process one committed suicide. So I hope this answers the question. If you had contact to people like Annetta Kahane, it could end that way, or maybe someone would just shrug it off and say, "Yeah, I don't like the government as well." Also not.
You may not be familiar with the movie "One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest," but it stars Jack Nicholson, and the actress, her name escapes me, but she's famous in the United States for playing these. It's actually called the Nurse Ratched character. It's this very hen, kind of mother, like den mother sort of type that is very, very strict and extremely cruel to people who disobey. And the actress was not actually that unattractive, but she was her personality was terrible. I mean, she was just a very mean-spirited person, and it's a very famous character.
You're talking about Louise Fletcher.
Sure. This woman reminds me of someone like that. It would just you would be unlucky to even be in her presence, because she would find some fault with you, and there would be an opportunity for her to have power, and she would exploit it without question. And that's just looking at her physiognomy, which is unfair, but she just looks like it. So please go ahead.
Don't you use the term mockingbird for these people?
Perhaps. I don't know.
That's I don't think that's an American expression.
Oh, okay.
It may be British. Sometimes I think there's something like that I've heard.
Yeah, but a person who is slandering or mocking people just for their own amusement or personal fulfillment.
Yeah, we would say such a person is like a caddy, maybe. I don't know the right idiom there.
Bitch.
Petty. Bitch, yes.
Perfect. Yeah, you were asking about what the West German citizens consider,
Yes.
think of the East German citizens. Well, and whether or not we or West or East German citizens want reunification. Well, during the protests that eventually brought down the East German government or followed the downfall of the East German government, there were two slogans. The first is famous, "Wir sind das Volk," meaning we are the people, referring to the people as the demos from democracy in the state, just like the first sentence of the United States Constitution says, "We the people."
You know,
etc.
Not to segue too much, but the Swedish Democrats actually use that phrase. They say "vi också der folk," which is sort of a very Swedish way of saying it. We are the folk, but they say we are also the folk, which is kind of a weak way of saying that. But I think they're inspired a little bit.
I guess they have something else in mind as well. But later on, this slogan changed and said, "Wir sind ein Volk," meaning we are one people. It says the East and the West Germans belong together. And I think the majority always thought so. I have no numbers on it, but I would say the majority thought so in the past and still think so. But yes, there are some growing pains of the reunification. There is this phenomenon of calling the East German citizens ungrateful because the reunification process is still not really done in an economic sense, that the East still receives money from the West in this Solidaritätszuschlag, meaning solidarity payment. And I think this is correct. It should happen. If you want to be in one country, one country with one currency. And this is also why I think the euro will fail, because such a payment does not exist, and it wouldn't have public support. And some people slander the East German citizens for their unique political stance and voting behavior. Like I said, they vote for different parties in greater numbers than West German citizens. And some of these, how do you call them? Bourgeoisie bohemian or loony left or champagne socialist slander the East Germans, and some go so far as to say that they're all Nazis. You probably heard about the events in the East German city of Chemnitz in Saxony.
Yes.
And just so everyone knew, there was this half German, half Cuban guy who was stabbed to death by, I'm not sure, a Syrian and an Iraqi refugee, and people from Chemnitz, and I would say the surrounding citizens demonstrated and said, we didn't want these people here because we anticipated this. Now it happened, and now we're angry. And this led to several politicians, journalists, and even the federal president to slander the people of the East of the former East as a lot, from hostile to foreigners to right out calling them they're all Nazis. And I think this is I think they're all wrong. It is not. It has nothing to do. Not much. Something, but not much to do with the economic situation of the former East. But I consider these people to be more aware and more critical towards the politicians. It's very special that the Linkspartei, the far left party, actually gained so much votes to govern a state in Germany, because usually they achieve like 10% or so, but they have received enough votes in, I'm not sure, 2015 or 2014 in the state of Thuringia, the former East German state, and now govern the state. And they will likely be replaced by government from the quote-unquote far right AfD in the coming elections in 2019. And this is very strange, because such a radical shift is very unusual, generally, not only in Germany. And this just shows how I think this just shows how easy and quick these people are to be mobilized and mobilize themselves. For them, democracy, quote unquote democracy, is something almost new. It's like almost 30 years old for them.
Do you think that they value it higher than people who are from quote unquote democratic countries for longer periods? Or do you think they're more skeptical of it?
As far as I know, the voter turnout is lower in the former East than in the former West. Generally, we have like 70 to 75%, and I guess something like 50% on average in the former East. So a lot of them might consider our current state as much as a sham as the last one was.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, which might not be so wrong. I mean, you see the resurrection, of something that can be considered to be a Stasi 2.0. You have this weird parliaments, both in the federal as well as the local level, where the parties more and more merge into one super party, so to say, because everyone makes a coalition right now with everyone. Like there are right now talks of the conservative CDU forming a coalition with the far left party, Die Linke, in Brandenburg, former East state of Germany. And this is very strange, even to me. This is not that I want to say that either or both are inherently bad, but they are so much differences and so far away on the political spectrum that a coalition between these two parties should almost be forbidden. It seems well, if I had to, I couldn't really explain it just right now. Just like now, I don't know really how to say it this way, other than it's all a sham. It's just fake. It's just like Carroll Quigley describes it in his almanac, this 1,000 pages long book, and says both in the United States, both the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party are controlled by one entity, and it doesn't matter who is elected. And right now it seems like that. It's like not the East German Republic ceased to exist, but the West German Republic ceased to exist, and now we're becoming one big GDR, which was the name of the East German Republic.
Well, it raises the question: did the West German Federal Democratic Republic? I may have messed that up, but the Western government. It's a question if they even existed, also, because our last guest, Nick Griffin from the UK, he was a former MEP in the European Parliament, and he basically sees the sort of the politics going on right now is basically between empires. It's not really about countries, and the countries that are sort of in the West are sort of underneath the American occupation in a way, and it's a different form of occupation. I mean, it's much more sophisticated than the Soviets, who would basically use tanks and rifles and soldiers. The West is now sort of under occupation of culture, and in that way it's much more insidious, and in other ways it's less cruel, but it's also in some ways more powerful. They call it soft power versus hard power, but the hard power is obviously there. And the leaders in Germany have, I think, obviously with Adenauer being the first example, in the West at least, have been selected or encouraged by the United States and their sort of allies like the UK to be participating in the broader strategy of the global imperial ambitions of Washington and what the American empire has become recently with the war on terror. And he sees it as sort of like these are just pieces on a chessboard to the people in Washington. And please don't confuse the people in Washington for the American people. There's a big difference. And the American people it depends on whom you talk to, but it's very different. It's varied. It's very diverse in terms of people's awareness of this stuff. A lot of people don't really realize that this is an empire we're living in. But I think people in Europe are also under that empire. And he sees the sort of German piece as being very interesting because the relationship between Russia started to grow with Schroeder, especially. And obviously it was even being developed with Gorbachev, and I believe it was it Kohl or Schmidt? I can't remember, but it was the leader of West Germany during the end of the Soviet Union with Gorbachev, and there were relationships being developed there to try to sort of play the Americans and Soviets off each other a little bit, and also have some independence for Germany. But unfortunately for Germans, the leaders have not really been able to be representing their people necessarily. It's really just kind of fighting between these two big powers, and that seems to be still happening. And this is what sort of Nick Griffin was seeing. It's this Russia propaganda in the United States right now is directed against the Russians because they fear that the Russians are going to have some influence over Germans in particular. I'm curious what you think about that.
Should I start? The head of the government, the chancellor during the reunification was Helmut Kohl. The how do you say it? More chubbier one? I think I can say it. He recently deceased. And I would generally agree, and would like to point out some examples. After the Second World War, there was a so-called denazification. Its official purpose was to get rid of the Nazis, which didn't happen because one of the chancellors, former chancellors of the Federal Republic of Germany, the Dao state of and former West German state, was a guy called Kiesinger. Kiesinger was a member of the NSDAP, of the Nazi Party, and he worked in the foreign ministry, unless if I'm mistaken, as an employee, a higher up employee. And of course, there was Gehlen, the guy from Fremde Heere Ost, meaning Foreign Armies East, and he later on became the head of the Federal Foreign Security / Foreign Intelligence Service of the current and former West German state, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the Federal Intelligence Service. He was also a member of the NSDAP. So denazification only could happen, and spare me the important people, so to say. And such thing never happened after the East German Republic ceased to exist. So we have still these people like Annette Kahane running around and even working for the government. The government obviously found a way to for her skills, and so we have a frighteningly amount of people who were then higher ups in the former East German state and now still working in the government, but of the quote-unquote Free West. And you mentioned the United States, the government of the United States, kind of ruling but not governing over Europe. I totally agree to this. In the introduction, at least from the German version, in the introduction of Brzezinski's Grand Chessboard, there is a short sentence from former Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher, and saying that this book that explains how the United States is supposed to take over the world, at least the world island meaning Eurasia, and how it can do this, how it can achieve this. And in the introduction, Hans-Dietrich Genscher says, this is an important historic piece German politicians have to be aware of, and I'm not sure, have to respect or even follow. I'm not sure about the last one. And there is a guy, an anchorman in Germany called Klaus Kleber, and he is hosting probably the largest news show here in Germany at a government broadcasting service. And he is a member of this transatlantic lobby, of the Atlantikbrücke, meaning Atlantic Bridge. And their purpose, their official purpose, is to foster and tighten the relationships between the United States and Germany. And the same thing happens for other countries here in Europe. It's happening with France, it's happening with Italy, and several other countries. I think these people, they're a huge lobby, also created this noble energy deal I talked about in the Aegean Sea. And these people participate in this process that is, at least I consider to be a rule, if rule but not govern of the United States or Washington, meaning the United States government, here in Europe. This is also why I say United States companies won't have much trouble here in the the European Union, because we have these transatlantic lobby. They are influencing politics here in Europe, except for some countries that are, how you say, out of reach, like probably Serbia or Belarus and so on and so forth. And these people are also the same. I don't even come up with the right derogatory term for them, but just think about one who lie to the public about the situation in the Ukraine and saying, it's all fine if it weren't be for the Russians. The Russians are only people who cause trouble in the Ukraine. Don't look at the Nazis. Don't look at the people wearing swastikas on their helmets. They don't exist. They even made the mistake of showing Nazis in the Ukraine in the public broadcasting news, in the news of the public broadcaster. But they still deny it.
Do Germans trust the media in Germany? Like the news reporting and television?
This is where I would give the former East Germans credit, because I think they trust the media less and are more critical than the West German citizens. But in general, there is this process more or less all across the Western world, starting to ask questions.
Like, what is your number one newspaper? Is it Die Welt, or what is the Zeitung?
Oh God, no.
No.
Neither. They both. I can come up with names like Theo Sommer, even former Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, who was co-founder of the newspaper Die Zeit. These newspapers are full of transatlantic lobbyists.
Yeah, I figured. Okay, so our biggest newspaper is the New York Times, and we've just watched over the past few years the credibility just go down and down and down and down.
Yep.
With the elections, and I don't know what's happening in Germany, but the good thing in America is that people are much more critical of the media now than they were 3 years ago, much more, and I think that's a good thing.
I would say it's pretty much the same thing. Newspapers are slowly dying out. They are less bought and less read and less trusted. But we have attempts from the government to seize the public space in a way of regaining the trust and the interpretational sovereignty, so to say. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Maybe if you can elaborate or explain more.
Yeah, meaning that the government is working with these newspapers to regain the authority, so to say.
Credibility, maybe. Yes.
Yeah, the credibility in a soft way. For example, they now financially help them. They support them by the state. It's now financially supporting such newspapers by paying for the rent of certain employees. I forgot which one. I'm sorry, but that's definitely happening. So it's a little bit like former East German propaganda, and you see them gripping to these straws. I don't know if these are the last straws, but it shows that they become desperate along the way. Just like with these weird censorship laws recently being passed on the level of the European Union, like Leistungsschutzrecht, meaning
the link tax.
Yeah, thank you. The link tax that they are providing then with special authority, so to say.
What? How does that work? They tax you if you put a link on a website? Or what is this?
This is the ultimate goal, yes.
Jeez.
So if I have a blog and I link to an article from, like you said, Die Welt or Die Zeit, newspapers here in Germany, I would have to pay these newspapers.
Wow.
Although that's silly because they usually publish bullshit.
Yeah.
And not only, but more and more bullshit. And there is an entity right now being casted that can very well be considered a ministry of truth. It's not so far yet, but it's clear where this is going to.
Well, I'm very impressed by your knowledge of this sort of Anglo world literature. You've mentioned Orwell, and it's not literature, but Carol Quigley's book. And I'm curious if you have any German works by German authors that are maybe not aware, but they're at least exploring some of these topics, and you know, our sort of ignorance of the German language sort of limits some of our knowledge of this. We know the famous ones, you know, Oswald Spengler and people like that, but I'm sure there's people we're missing. So would you ascribe any insight to certain German authors that are sort of aware of these things?
Yeah, what these authors usually publish in German only. So, and I haven't read all of them.
Well, there was one, I don't remember his name, but he was talking about the sort of Islamification of Germany and how this is a problem. And he was being interviewed, and there are actually, there's another one that just occurred to me that is very famous. I can't remember his name now, but
the author is Gregory Ritter. The book is Germany Abolishes Itself.
Okay.
I'm trying to find the
there was a guy that went to
title.
jail, though. He went to prison, and he was very famous also. But this was a little bit before, I think, the one you're talking about, Hank.
This is Deutschland schafft Zekab. Does that ring a bell, Philip?
Yes, this is Theo Sarrazin. He was a former employee of the Bundesbank, the central bank here in Germany. And he has a long record of doing these quote-unquote scandal books. He is what you just said, the Islamification of Europe or Germany is actually his latest work. He was famous for what you said, Deutschland schafft sich ab, meaning Germany abolishes itself. That goes into great detail of several problems. Not only that, but also about I think the trade surplus of Germany is also mentioned in this book, and it's like a old politician, neutrally speaking, an old politician. Delivering his memoirs, saying, being free to say whatever he wants right now, and for this he gets ostracized, and people create scandals for this because apparently you cannot talk about that, which is, yeah, it's like it's like Stasi. It's and they quit his contract with the former publisher of the book. He wanted the new book he wrote, feindliche Übernahme, meaning hostile takeover, also regarding immigration and Islam, and his publisher quit the contract. This could have also come from the textbook from the Stasi. And although he's not much aware of the quote unquote transatlantic lobby, I've never seen him talking about that, and I'm not aware that he's writing about this. I would recognize. Sorry, the word just escapes me. Suggest the authors Josef Foschepot, who wrote a book about the about hidden or secret laws that made the German government able and allows the German government to spy on its people even further. It's called Überwachtes Deutschland, meaning surveilled Germany. But it's
well, in the United States, there's sort of a genre that we call conspiracy theories that talks about a lot of this transatlantic, or what many call the New World Order groups. And I recall this vaguely, but maybe you've heard of this. I don't know, but they were talking about Germany and how there are underground bunkers or systems under the city that have UN soldiers. I mean, this sounds a little bit unbelievable, but it's the type of thing that it's very popular in America to talk about this stuff, and I'm curious if this genre is even allowed in Germany, let alone popular. I mean, it's something that it may be seen as ridiculous in German culture, so therefore it's not really talked about as much. But for whatever reason, in America, we entertain these things, and perhaps that's because we're more close to the Hollywood culture of sensational, grand stories that are not really true. But I do believe some of this is true. I don't necessarily think that in particular is the truth. I'm curious about what people talk about in terms of speculating what actually is the powerful people involved in your government, because clearly there's a disconnection between what the people want in Chemnitz, for example, and what the politicians are doing. So that there's someone else involved in making these decisions that is not representing the people. The question is, do you have, do you talk about who that is? And it seems like you do, but would you describe yourself as atypical, not normal, or would you say there are people? I mean, that's okay, that's not bad, but it's just, I'm curious what the normal German person is thinking about, or if there's some people at least that are talking about this stuff.
First of all, I'm not aware of any underground bunkers, but I guess the politicians would just flee to the United States. And not normal is
maybe
really nice. Not normal is really nice.
Okay.
Yes, there is some sort of, in Germany we would say Gegenöffentlichkeit, meaning opposite public.
Right.
That gets slandered by the mainstream, by newspapers like Die Zeit or Die Welt. Not at last because they are targeted. There is this book, there are books about these transatlantic lobby and about journalists. I don't know if you can still call them journalists. Journalists.
No, I call them propagandists. They're salespeople for the establishment.
Revealing how they work. People like Uwe Krüger or Udo Ulfkotte. Udo Ulfkot was also slandered for being, I don't know, wearing tinfoil hats and whatnot. And but they have large lists of sources, and they are not just some nut jobs. They go into great detail in explaining what's happening. In this case, about the process of how journalism gradually degrades into propaganda. And the other case is the transatlantic lobby. Allow me to go into a little bit into detail of what's happening there and who they are, because I mentioned them so much. There is a book from Wolfgang Bittner called Die Eroberung Europas durch die USA, meaning how the United States is conquering Europe. And he as well goes into great details, lists a lot of sources, and explains how the economic structure and laws, especially regarding economics, are shaped in a way to benefit first and foremost investors from the United States. They are also largely intertwined with people who are sometimes considered to be free market advocates, and from other to be to propagandize socialism for the rich, which I think is more adequate, because these people don't want a free market where people have choices and can potentially even evade products or companies they don't like, and have transparency. Think tanks like the Hayek Society or Mont Pelerin Society, where industrialists and these fringe economists gathered and still gather around. Guys like Friedrich von Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, Milton Friedman. I don't like any one of them. And I think most of what they advocated or still advocate is
I think they're all dead, but yes, they're certainly famous.
Yeah, but new ones are growing everywhere. You repeatedly mentioned James Corbett from the Corbett Report.
Oh, yes.
He is doing a great job regarding geopolitics, but I think he utterly fails in terms of economics.
Yeah. He's a libertarian. I mean, we on the show had our own libertarian experiences. If I can sort of just say why it's so popular, it's an approved choice, honestly. It is a given option to people who are frustrated with some of the politics in at least America that is it's unipolar, but it's presented as bipolar, and the reality is it's not choice. And so the libertarians offer you choice in theory. The reality is, though, if you just work alone, you're not going to get any power, so you're not going to have any choice in a grand scheme of things. And so I think that's the main problem. But that's why it's appealing to people, because it's a very safe place for the establishment to put people, because it makes them not threatening, and it sounds nice. Everybody has choice and everything, but it really is almost by design allowed to just make people powerless, in my opinion. But yeah, go ahead.
I can understand the people if they reject the government when they see the government doing something very nasty, like
right.
we had this with the Stasi and have this again with this Pennywise woman, with Aneta Kahane. And yeah, when I think about that, yeah, I reject the government, but I think it is a fallacy to consider that just by abolishing the government, no one will find a way to misuse or coerce a structured power.
Sure.
This can also happen. This happens with every lobby. Can happen with every lobby.
Well, in order to fight power, you have to have power. I mean, it just doesn't work if you have no power. I mean, it's ridiculous, actually, if you just put it in those simple terms.
And the government is usually a very stable institution and way to use power. And governments often have a lot of power. Yeah.
There was we should probably get to closing, but I had one more question about the sort of New World Order, transatlantic. I think it's more than Atlantic at this point, but it's certainly concentrated in the Americas, or the United States at least. And this is actually a source from Europe, which I'll send you the link if you want, but it's a very good resource. This comes out of Belgium, and it's called the Institute for Study of Globalization and Covert Politics. And they have a very interesting list of the NGOs, non-government organizations that actually have a lot of influence over the governments and the people of the world. And they break it down by individuals and then by countries. And Germany has a very small section, but it has a section on this list with some names, and I'd like to just read them to you, and I would like to hear what you think. So number one, and this is ranked by the way, by the number of memberships of the different organizations. So the first one, for example, is Wolfgang Ischinger. He has 19 positions in different NGOs. The second one is Counts of Lambsdorff, 13 positions. Joska Fischer, 11. Karl zu Gutenberg, 8. And Helmut Kohl, 6. It's a very short list, and I'm sure there's more people that are not on this list, but this is from Belgium. And what do you think about those people?
Can you just repeat them? Wolfgang Ischinger?
Wolfgang Ischinger, Counts of Lambsdorff, Joska Fischer, Karl zu Gutenberg, and Helmut Kohl.
Helmut Kohl just deceased, but okay.
Some of these people are there for historical reasons, just to show important people. It's true, they're not all living, but for the other people, I actually had never heard of everyone except for Joska Fischer and Helmut Kohl. Have you heard those names before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let us start with Helmut Kohl. Prominent guy, once chancellor, and applauded for being the head of the reunification and spearheading the reunification. He was chancellor at that time, and what's to say about him? There was a large scandal of money being spent to his party, the Conservative Party, the CDU-CSU, and he promised to never reveal the names of those who gave the money, and he never did. He's fostering this concept of socialism for the rich, and fostered this idea of socialism for the rich, and I think he was bored. He's coming, I guess, from a medium income household, from more or less working class background, and changed laws and government policies in a way so on his way of climbing up the ladder of in political terms, by giving handouts to the rich. Then you named Wolfgang Ischinger. He is now the head of the Münchner Sicherheitskonferenz, the Munich Security Conference. I guess it's the annual meeting in Munich in Bavaria, southern Germany, where all sorts of political leaders and quote unquote influencer meet to discuss the future. This is relatively interesting because people from both East and West meet there. You had also a very, very interesting confrontation between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and another lackey of the Conservative Party. His name escapes me right now. Discussing the situation in the Ukraine, and Lavrov showed some balls and called this lackey out for essentially being bought by countries like Azerbaijan for lobbying a gas pipeline through Turkey to deliver gas and oil to Europe. And this guy I'm talking right now about, I'm sorry, his name escapes me, is in the same league like Joschka Fischer, who is also lobbying for this pipeline. I think it's called Nabucco pipeline, supposed to get the gas out of the Shah Deniz gas field in the Caspian Sea from Azerbaijani territory. To deliver this gas to Europe. Because, just like I said, Europe is trying, I would say, advised to get rid of Russian gas and Russian oil. And this is very interesting because Joschka Fischer is a member of the quote-unquote eco-friendly Bündnis 90 Die Grüne, bound 90 the Greens. He is supposed to be against fossil fuels, but he's lobbying for it extensively. And then you had Graf Lambsdorff. This is a guy who wrote the infamous Lambsdorff papers, describing how you can transform what was considered in the past to be a soziale Marktwirtschaft, being social market economy, into a quote-unquote free economy, which I consider to be socialism for the rich, because they demand all sort of handouts from the government for corporations, so they grow and supply everyone with wealth, jobs, income, and so on and so forth, as if it would be better to give this money to corporations instead of to the people in the first place. But yeah, who am I to say? And Gutenberg was the former. He had a lot of positions. He was defense minister and I think Minister for Internal Affairs. He also supervised the transformation of the Bundeswehr from a involuntary service to a voluntary service. So in the past, people were forced to go to the Bundeswehr or go for a limited amount of time to do some social work, or being a soldier for 9 months.
Right. We call that mandatory service. Singapore still has that.
Conscription.
And he abolished this.
It's more than conscription. Conscription just gives the government the right to get people to be soldiers if they need them. But I think this is like everyone has to do it no matter what.
Yes,
Yeah.
9 months, but he abolished this, and here's the Karl Theodor zu Gutenberg. This is the guy you meant, right? He was former economy minister. How could I forget this? And then he became minister for defense, supervising the Bundeswehr, the Federal Army of Germany. And he transformed this army to a, for what's slanderous, I would say, mercenary army, because it's about, right now it's supposed to be, in the words of the members of like Montpellier Society and Hayek Society, more efficient, small government, and quick response, yada yada yada. And he did a lot to do this by privatizing huge chunks of it, of the Bundeswehr, of the Federal Army, and I would say that's contributing to socialism for the rich as well. But then he stumbled upon his doctor's thesis that was apparently faked, and he got ostracized. And now he's somewhere in the nowhere. He became a nobody. Yeah, I have mostly derogatory terms for these people.
Maybe one more final question. What do you think about the EU? Do you think it's a good thing for Europe? Do you think the idea is bad itself rather than the actual implementation as we see it now? Maybe if you have an opinion on Brexit, where does Europe go from here? Is kind of the general question.
I would ask you, which Brexit? 2 years or what?
The one that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Obviously.
Somebody had a good joke that if Theresa May was a divorce lawyer, nobody would ever actually break up.
She's a marriage counselor.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly have opinions about Europe, but we're American, and we don't really feel like it's our place necessarily. I don't know if you want our opinion. I mean, obviously, the sort of imperialism of America is not really welcome at this point. So it's.
I have a guess what you think about, and I would say I'm sorry that you are not the government of the United States, because the United States pretty much controls the European Union. Let's be honest.
Seems like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's and I have mostly negative feelings about this. I have right now a hard time thinking about something that's actually good. Oh yeah, there's one thing. You can travel from Lisbon to Tallinn or Helsinki at the Baltic Sea.
Right.
Without a visa. That's pretty cool. But besides from that, and this is also only as a means to have labor and services being able to travel around the European Union.
Well, let's not forget your Syrian and Iraqi workers. I'm being sarcastic, but it's I think the Schengen zone has opened the internal borders to the detriment of the people in Europe, unfortunately. But even though the Europeans themselves traveling amongst Europe is probably a good idea, it has weakened the security situation, clearly.
No, you can still build borders. There is a border being
you can built, but it's not easy. And look at what they're doing to Hungary now. They're trying to get them out of the EU.
No, they won't get Hungary out. either they get all the Visegrad states out, or none. This is, of course, you can still build borders. A German company built the border between Saudi Arabia and Iraq because Saudi Arabia didn't want the refugees, and Viktor Orban built a border at fortified the border of what is it? Croatia, Slovenia, and Serbia or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. Just to keep these people out because he doesn't wants them. Same thing as in the Czech Republic. If you drive into the Czech Republic, you might see some signs at nearby the streets saying "No Islam equals no terror," and same voices coming from the people out of Poland. And this is understandable because these countries were colonized just recently, and you have a similar process happening in the former East German states, in the in the states that were once part of the East German state, because they feel the same, they think the same, or okay, not the same, but pretty similar. They feel manipulated and unsovereign in their own country right now, and they for them it feels eerily familiar right now. Regarding the European Union, well, the Parliament of the European Union is the only parliament that is not allowed to issue legislations. It cannot write a law and vote upon it all by itself. It needs the European Commission. Who votes the European Commission? The European Parliament. What does the European Commission do when the elections don't turn out as expected? They hold another election. It is intrinsically undemocratic. And the main pillars of the European Union are no borders for capital, meaning money, no borders for goods and services, and no borders for people traveling from one country to another. The last one is comfortable. If you live here, you can just visit France or visit Spain or Italy or Germany if you want to, without much trouble. This is very nice, but its sole purpose is to move labor from one place to another. We have recently, the European Union recently signed the treaty with the Ukraine about this treaty regarding economic ties and travel ties, and now you can see Ukrainian signs on the cars at local construction sites, meaning these. I'm sorry, it's not derogatory, but cheap Ukrainian people can now be employed in a high labor country like Germany, France, or whatever. No, I don't have much good to say about the European Union. We can have a free travel agreement. I'm not an advocate of free trade, but certain trade agreements and common standards for products. But besides that, I'm pretty much against it.
Well, Philip, was there anything you'd like to say to our American listeners before we close out the show here?
I don't know. Not much. I think I've said everything.
Well, if I can say, I think that the fact that we may not live in the same country, let alone empire, maybe we do live in the same empire, but officially we don't. But I think the way forward is basically normal people talking to each other like this. It really makes the abstract much more tangible, and I think people need to understand that most people are not so bad, and most people are pretty normal, and it's just we want to have decent lives, and it seems like the people in our governments are pretty much all the same. They're psychopathic people who care about their power. How do we get our own power back is the bigger question, but I think it starts with having conversations like this. So I'm very honored to have you on, Philip. I appreciate you giving us the German perspective. And I also hope that you don't think all Americans are like the imperialists that seem to be taking over your continent. We don't all want that, and we would like to work together better, but in a more respectful way, where individual countries at least are able to stand on their own feet, like you've sort of indicated you would like to have for countries like Greece in the case of the EU and the trade of free trade of goods that makes them dependent and less capable of supporting themselves. I personally would like to have all peoples be able to be either working in a loose alliance or not really interacting as much as they do. Not to say that there can't be conversations and travel, but the way we've homogenized the world and Americanized the world with the sort of free trade and the Hollywood culture has really destroyed a lot of the beauty of the planet. And I think people are starting to realize that, and I think conversations like this are helping that move in a better direction.
Yeah. Try to get some Europeans on the show as long as you still can, unless we're all vanishing behind the new Iron Curtain.